Have you ever thought, sure seems like the universe is working against me? Is there any truth to that? Well, maybe you've also heard this idea that the universe is tending towards entropy or disorder. In other words, things that are highly ordered, like life and the things we make here on our planet, ultimately the universe wants to be disordered. Is that true? Is there any credence to this idea that the universe wants ultimate disorder? Well, in this podcast, we're going to look into that a little bit and talk a little bit more about free energy that's available in the universe. Let's get started. So, I mentioned that life is all about order. That's one of the properties of life. We are a highly ordered system. There is order to everything about life. So, how does that happen? To keep things ordered, right? To keep things working correctly and in a constant state of order, well, that takes a lot of energy input, right? So, to get order in living things, we have to have a lot of energy constantly put into the system. And ultimately, therefore, when we lose energy, we no longer have food, we no longer have any input of energy, that means that the order of our bodies, the order of life, will decrease, and ultimately, things die. So, energy is super important in a highly ordered system, such as living systems, life. Now, back to the universe. Well, increased disorder, fancy word is entropy for that, will be offset then by our biological processes that increase order. So even though the universe is tending towards entropy, you'll find that biology, our biological processes, are trying to increase our order. So let's try to understand this in a little different way. Let's say you have a big boulder and then there's a pull. And like any person, let's jump off of the big boulder down into the pool. But let's think about really what's happening in this situation. Let's say it's you, when you're on the top of this boulder ready to jump off, you essentially are in a pretty unstable position, right? You're up high, there's gravity, it's going to act. But you have more free energy, meaning there's some energy free and available to jump down, and gravity is going to pull you down towards this pool. There is also a higher G, and G, Gibbs free energy constant, basically says there's a larger potential when you're up here to do work, right? When you're at the top of this, there's a lot of potential for you to fall down. So what happens? All right, you jump. Now you're in the pool. Well, what's changed? Now you have less energy that's freely available, right? You're in the pool. You can't go much deeper unless you get to the bottom. You have a lower G, less potential now to do work. But you are more stable. The universe wants to go from here to here. Disordered, more stable. And let's think about that in terms of molecules in our body. So if we have a bunch of molecules that are pretty close, tightly packed, there's a lot of potential energy for these to move out, right? To disperse, to diffuse. You come in, let's say you've got some perfume, you spray in a room. Those molecules are tightly packed together, more free energy available. But what's going to naturally happen? Those are going to diffuse through the room, right? They're going to go to a more stable position where they're not so tightly packed together. And now there's less potential for them to move, less potential for them to do work. So this video, we really want to focus on this idea of energy and molecules and how they move from these higher potential energy situations to the lower potential energy situations. So let's talk about chemicals of life. In life, you hear a lot about metabolism, right? The breaking down of food, the building up of our body. Metabolism can be broken down really into two different types, all right? There's anabolic metabolism and catabolic. Let's look first at anabolic. So anabolic metabolism, or you could say anabolism, is basically when we're forming bonds between molecules. So when would we do this, right? Growth. Growth would be a good example when you're growing, right? Whether you're in the womb growing or whether you're loading up on proteins and carbs and you're growing, your body's building as you grow. Basically taking smaller molecules, putting together to make a larger molecule. That's anabolism or anabolic metabolism. You may remember the reaction that does this is dehydration synthesis because we take out water to synthesize a larger molecule. You may have also heard people say anabolic steroids, right? These are steroids that some might take to sort of build, form molecules, form those proteins in the muscles. The other type of metabolism is catabolism or catabolic metabolism. And this is the opposite. This is breaking down bonds. So a prime example of this is when you're digesting. When you're digesting food, you're breaking down the food you ate into smaller molecules. You may remember from another video, this is a hydrolysis reaction because you're taking a larger molecule, you're breaking apart water, splitting those into two smaller molecules. So these reactions of life, anabolism, catabolism, are what drive our ability to maintain order, and we use energy for this. So let's visit something that you may have learned in physics or a different class, and these are the laws of thermodynamics. When we think thermo, a lot of people think heat, right, temperature, but I'd rather you think about energy when you think about this. So the first law of thermodynamics basically says the total energy in an isolated system is going to stay the same. You may have heard this phrase, right? Energy can't be created or destroyed. That's a reinterpretation of this. So if the total energy has to stay the same, that means you can't create it or destroy it because the total amount has to stay the same. And a prime example of this is, right, food. So you take this heron here it's got itself some fish. There's some potential energy in that fish, right, to eat. There's some mass, there's some energy. So this bird, this heron, is going to eat it. The energy that was here is not going to be destroyed. It's not going to be created. It's actually going to be transferred into the animal that ate it, right? So the total energy is still going to stay the same, even though it's changing its form. The second law is a little more tricky to understand. The second law is basically saying that entropy, or the amount of disorder, increases over time. Another way you might say that is the sum of entropies never decreases. So if entropy is increasing, you could also say the sum never decreases. That's two ways of saying the same thing. And you might have heard someone say something like, well, doesn't life violate this law? Because if thermodynamics is saying disorder is always increasing, well, life by its very definition has to be ordered. So isn't life evolving? Doesn't that violate this law? Actually, no. Living systems do not violate this law because you've got to look at the entire system. Basically what we do, all right, think about our heron again. The heron ate the fish. So that energy changed from the fish, it changed its forms, and it's now available here. And you might say, oh, well, but there's no more disorder, right? We took the order here, ate it, and now all the order just went over to the bird. But it actually doesn't, because what you've got to remember is that as living things survive and grow, we create entropy by essentially first decreasing it. So let me show you, for example. Think about all of the heat lost to metabolism. Think about the cellular respiration using that food. So 100% of that available energy is from the fish, doesn't go directly into the heron, because a lot of that energy is lost as heat, okay? So in a way, even though we're transferring energy to keep order, so much of that order is lost because this is an inefficient system and we lose so much to heat through the process of breaking down the food and cellular respiration, things like that. So order is maintained by coupling processes that create entropy, right? There's that heat being released. We're losing more disorder into the universe. But that's coupled with a process that decreases it, right? We're putting some of that potential energy back into the organism, into the bird, so that it can fly, do what it needs to do. So life is a balancing act of coupling these processes. Let's look a little deeper into these two processes. So chemical reactions, some chemical reactions release energy. So think of it as exiting. Those we call exergonic reactions, meaning the products will have less energy than the original reactants. So here is a diagram of that. So if you think down here, here's the progress of our reaction, right? So we start here and then we move this way. Here's a total amount of free energy available. So the reactants, the things we had before, in this case, we've got a lot, right? Maybe this is some sugar. It's got a lot of potential energy. Or the example I give, maybe this is ATP. Well, as the reaction takes place, some energy is lost. So the products, in this case, maybe let's say it's ADP or some smaller form of glucose that we broke down. Notice that there's less energy available. So we released energy, and our now free energy available has gone down. Here, a lot of free energy. Less free energy to react now because we already gave some off. This is called an exergonic reaction because we essentially had energy exit. Prime examples of when we break down food, right? When you eat a donut, when it's a donut, it's got a lot of potential energy. But once you start breaking that down and getting some of the products of that energy, there's no longer as much potential in that donut. And we call these catabolism reactions. So what's the opposite? The opposite of that would be chemical reactions that input energy, okay? We call this endergonic reaction because there's more energy in the product. This would be like growth, building polymers. So if we think here, all right, here's the opposite. If we had a little free energy in the reactants and we invested some energy, put it in, now look, the products have a lot more potential energy that's been gained. And the example, of course, here is ADP going to ATP. Oh, now it's got an extra phosphate group. It's got a little more potential energy to use. Okay? So the difference between exergonic and endergonic, exergonic energy is exiting, reactants down to products. Endergonic, we're putting in energy so the product has more available energy than what we started with. So, how do we use this? How do we use these chemical reactions to live? Organisms require energy to live. I just mentioned that. So where does that energy come from? Well, we have to couple exergonic reactions, all right, reactions that release energy, with endergonic, those that need it. So if you think of this, think of it as an exergonic reaction like some food. Maybe this is some sugar that you ate. Your body will break down the sugar into smaller molecules. These smaller molecules, right, don't have as much potential as the bigger one did originally. So in other words, when we broke down the larger one into the smaller one, we got some energy available. Well, what do we do with that energy? Well, living things then use that energy that we got from eating our food, breaking down our food, to transfer over so that your body can build up different chemicals. So take these other smaller chemicals, increase the order by making a different molecule. Now this has more potential energy than it started with. So basically, if you think about it in terms of just a living organism, we eat, we require energy so that we can use that energy to maintain order and build things in our body, build our muscles, keep our body working, have our neurons in our brain fire. That energy is essential for life. So, if these reactions that we're looking at want to go, right, if the laws of the universe say we go from order to disorder, why don't these chemicals in our body just start breaking down all the time? Why aren't these reactions spontaneous if the universe wants this disorder? Well, the reason is covalent bonds, right, which make up our macromolecules, are fairly stable, okay? They don't want to naturally break down. To break it down, you've kind of got to put some energy into it. And maybe you remember from chemistry, we might call this activation energy. So look at my example here of a reaction. So if we want the reactants A and B to form chemical C, we actually have to give it a little push, right? Maybe like if you're in the chemistry lab, maybe you add a little heat, maybe you add a catalyst, something to get it up here, right? You got to give a little energy to it so that it then, in this case, releases this energy and we get this product. Because these reactants are pretty stable, this doesn't happen spontaneously often, in the body anyway. We need to put some activation energy. We need to put a catalyst in it. And a catalyst basically takes the energy we had up here and lowers the activation energy so we can get the products. So if you take a look at this example, I've got this blue line at the top, no catalyst, but this sort of pink line at the body, that's what happens with a catalyst. So here we got some reactants, right? We've got some chemicals over here. They're going to react and form some product down here. But look at this huge activation energy that needs to be put in for this reaction to take place. With a catalyst, some other chemical, notice that could lower the activation energy required, so this reaction could take place and not use as much energy. That way our net energy is improved for life. So in biology, what do we call these catalysts? What's a cell to do to reduce that activation energy to make sure that our reactions are taking place? Well, we're going to get chemical help, and those are called enzymes. My next video is all about enzymes, so let me give you a brief introduction to enzymes. So this is the same image we just looked at, right? Without a catalyst, look how much energy we got to put in to get this reaction to take place. With a catalyst, look here, much lower. So what's our catalyst? Well, it's an enzyme. Let's say that we've got this little molecule here that we're going to break down. And we're going to take that and we want to break it down to some product here. If we use an enzyme, and the enzyme is this blue thing here, it essentially provides a space. It provides the place for the reaction to occur and thus allows the activation energy to be much less by providing that place for the reaction to occur. And therefore, we get some products, right? We now have this, and we lost that particular thing. So we get some products, and we still have the enzyme to use again later. So in terms of energy, we'll talk more about these enzymes in my next video. I have a whole video on these enzymes for you to learn about. So let's take it all in, what we've talked about. I started the video, is the universe working against you? Well, in a way, okay, the universe wants disorder. You are a highly ordered system. We like order. We like things, even if you think about it on a different scale, as a metaphor in our life, we like things to be ordered. But the universe wants disorder. How do we combat that? With a lot of energy. So we couple the energy that it takes to build and maintain order gets coupled with those other reactions that, of course, in a way, increase the disorder in our system and allow the laws of thermodynamics to stay in place. So if you think the universe is against you, maybe sometimes it is.